Hey, welcome. This is Lee Waller, and today I am working with Unreal Engine 5.4's new motion design tools. And I'm going to take a look at recreating this animated heads-up display dial. During this tutorial, I'll take a look at 2D shapes, meshes, modifiers, cloners, lighting, materials, and animation. This won't be a detailed tutorial on all of those tools, but we will touch on all of them to recreate this dial. If you're new to Unreal Engine, you might want to take a look at a couple of other tutorials I have. One where I set up this workspace that I'm in, and another that I go over the user interface. To start off, I'm going to create the background first. To create that background, I'm going to go to 2D shapes, and I'm going to double click on the rectangle button here. And that creates a basic rectangle. Over here in the Motion Designer Outliner, you'll see that the rectangle is selected. And so now all of my details below here pertain to this rectangle right here. I'm going to make a few adjustments first. I'm going to drop down to shape, and this is what creates the shape of that rectangle. And you'll see that the size type right here is Unreal Units. It gives us the options to change that to pixel. I'm a little more familiar with that, so I'm going to select pixel there. And you can see that this rectangle is 192 by 192 pixels. I'm going to make sure that my pixel size is set to free. And I'm going to make this 1920 by 1080 so that it just gives me a good understanding of my workspace. And so my background now is 1920 by 1080. That's the resolution that I'm going to output this project at. So that helps me work within that space. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Material. And here is where I can change the material for this. You can see it's just a white material right now. But I want to change that, and there's three options for me to use to change that material. You can see right now we're on Simple. They also have the option to bring in an asset, which would be a material or texture that you bring in from outside, something that you've created in another program or downloaded. I'm going to go to the Material Designer option, which is a new tool in Unreal Engine. It opens up the Material Designer, and you'll see that it changes it to this default texture. Select the base material button there. I'll go to the type of material here, and you'll see that I have texture. I'm going to change that to solid color and choose my color right here. Click on the color picker, and I have a hexadecimal that I'm going to go ahead and add in. I'm going to paste that in and just select off. You'll see that it changes it to this blue color here. I'm going to hit OK on that. And then you'll see here that I have the option to add a mask. I'm going to click on that tab, and you'll see that I have very similar options here. I'm going to change from texture here to a radial gradient, and that will add a radial gradient mask over the color that I've selected. I'm going to deconstrain these two, and that will give me more options over adjusting the radial gradient. I am going to change the scale just a little bit. I want to make sure that this is on free. And then I'm going to just bring this down a little bit on the y-axis just to make it a little bit more of an oval. And so I'm done now with creating the material that I want for my background. And I can always come back to this and adjust it. And before I get out of the Material Designer, I do want to take note of that this box is checked, meaning that this material is unlit, that it will not be affected by the lights in the scene. Keep this in mind as you work with lighting. I'm not really going to do much lighting in this, so for me, this works. So I'm going to leave this to unlit for right now. I'm going to close that out. So I'm going to start creating the dial. For the dial, I want to use an ellipse. We're going to actually use several of them. So I'm going to start off by double-clicking on the ellipse 2D shape. There's our first ellipse, but I want to point something out. The background and the ellipse are sitting on the exact same location. Here's the location properties for the ellipse because it is what is selected. And I'll just choose the rectangle real quick. You can see that our location properties are the same. So I'm going to go to the ellipse, and we kind of have to stack these ourselves. So I'm going to bring this forward just a little bit. So I'm going to click on the location X property right there, and I'm going to set that to a -1. You'll see now that it pops out in front of our background. Earlier, they were being mixed together, and that could cause rendering issues. So we are going to have to stack these layers ourselves. From there, I'm going to drop down to the shape materials and make some adjustments to this. Our original dial needs to be much larger than that. So I'm going to bring up the mesh size to 400, and that'll set it to 400 by 400. I'm going to leave my sides at 64. That is the roundness of the ellipse. And so as I decrease that, you can see that we get more straight lines creating this. And so a lower number means less resolution on the circle. So I'm going to bring that back up to 64 and leave it there. And now I'll go back up and create a material for this. I'm going to go back into the material designer for it. On this one, I'm going to set our base color to just a solid white. And then I'm going to bring the opacity down to 0.15. Going to leave that one also to unlit and close that out. And there we have our first ellipse. To take a look at that, you'll see that it is simply just an ellipse with that faded color in it. Now, I want an outline to this. So the easiest way to do that, since we already have the ellipse created, I'm just going to select that ellipse, copy that, and paste it. Let me go ahead and label these. So I'm going to label this dial background. And then this next one, I'm going to label dial outline. To create the outline, what we're going to need to do is add a modifier to it. So I'm going to make sure that that dial outliner is selected. If you do not have this operator stack tab right here, jump over here to the far left, click that operator stack button, and it will open that up for you. And we have our second ellipse selected. So we're going to go into the modifiers. You'll see that we have modifiers and animators. We want to add a modifier to this. We have our modifiers open and we want to select outline. That takes that ellipse right there and creates an outline on it. So I'm going to go to the original ellipse and hide that real quick so we can take a look at our dial outline here. You can see that our material here is acting a little weird, and I don't know if this is just a glitch in Unreal or what it is, but what we're going to need to do for that material is we're going to need to go down and choose from Material Designer to, I'm going to go with just a simple right now on this one, and that fixes our material. And to adjust the thickness of this outline, I'm going to need to go back to our modifiers. It's under the operator stack right there. And let me bring this down just a little bit so we can see it. There's our outline modifier. And I will bring this distance down just a little bit, maybe 5 on that. And so that we have that outline. Jump back into the motion design outliner and bring the visibility back on our original dial. Just going to deselect everything and take a look at what we've got now. Our original design does have one more outline in it that's a little bit smaller than this one. So what I'm going to do is go to that dial outline and copy and paste it, Control C and Control V on that. And I'll select that dial outline 2 and make sure that my details properties right here, I'm going to drop down to the size, the mesh size right here, and set that to 245. And so there's our second, and maybe even adjust that a little bit on our modifier so that that's a little bit thinner. Maybe set that to 4. I'll bring that on down to 3. Just a little bit thinner. And go back into Motion Design Outliner and take a look at that. So next we want to create our dashes. We're going to have 2 different sets of dashes. To create our dashes, we're going to need a cloner. Come over here to our shapes and actors, and we're going to select the actors, and there's our cloner. I'm going to double click on it. It drops in a set of cubes. The cloner's right there. I'm going to rotate it just a little bit so that you can see the cubes. And it has created a 3 by 3 by 3 set of cubes. Now, we're not going to use that default cube. We're actually going to use a cylinder in place of it. So we'll add that in next. Let me jump back to the cloner, set this back to 0. To replace the default cube, I'm going to need to jump into a different mode up here. Rather than motion design, I'm going to click on the drop down and go to modeling, and it defaults into create. And so I want to create a cylinder. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to go with the default settings right here, then just come into the viewer with my mouse and just drop that right there and hit accept. Just so that I can make sure I know where this is, I'm going to go to my location and zero that out. And you'll see that in our cloner, that default cube is a child of the cloner. We're going to replace that with the cylinder. So I'm going to grab the cylinder, drag it down. Now the cloner is highlighted by this blue outline. I'm going to drop the cylinder on it. So now the cylinder is a child of the cloner. And you can see that we have the cylinder and the cube both in there. We don't need both of them, so I'm going to select the default cube and just delete it. And so now we are cloning only the cylinder. I'm going to make a few adjustments to the cylinder to get it to the size that we need it. So I'm going to select the cylinder, come down to scale, and I'm going to scale this down a good bit. On the X and Y, I'm going to do a 0.03 on both of them. So I'm just tabbing over. And then on the Z, I'm going to bring that down to 0.3. Next thing I'm going to do is go into the cloner, and we'll make some adjustments to it. Select the cloner, drop down to layout. And right now you can see that the layout mode is grid. Click on that, and you'll see all the different types of layouts that we can use. We're going to focus on a circle. And just so we can see this, I'm going to jump back up real quick, and on my rotation, Y rotation right there, I'm going to set it to 90 degrees. You can see that this is starting to come together. We need more cylinders than just the 9. So we'll go to the count right there and type in 20 right there. And then we'll bring the radius down just a little bit to kind of center them in that space. I think 192 will work on that. All right, I'm just going to select the label right there so I can deselect everything and take a look at this. So we have our first set of dashes set up. I'm going to label that cloner to large dashes. And I can close that up for right now. I'm going to select it and copy and paste it. And that way we can easily set up our second set of dashes. So I'm going to label this small dashes. So we'll make adjustments to both the cloner and to the cylinder. So first in the cloner, I'm going to drop down to the count, and we're going to bring that up to 100. So we'll select the cylinder, and we're going to go to scale. And on the scale for the Z axis there, we'll bring that down to 0.15. And one more change we can make is go back into the cloner, and we will adjust the radius, and we'll set that to 180 to move those smaller dashes in just a little bit, and deselect everything and take a look at it. And so now we've created all of our dashes. Next, we can add in our numbers starting at 0 from here and going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And we will do the same for the bottom here. I'll start off with 0 right here. And so I'm going to jump back into our motion design mode, and we'll go to actors, and you'll see that we have a text actor. Just double click on that. It drops in that text actor right there, and you'll see it right up here. I am going to select that text actor, and we'll make some adjustments to it. First thing I want to do is bring this out just a little bit. So I'm going to set that to a -1. And then I'll drop down here to our text options. So if we want to change the font, I'm going to keep it with this Roboto. But if you want to change the font, there's your option to change the font. I'm going to leave it on regular, but to change the text, what the word actually is, we'll select right there. And the first one's going to be 0. And there's our first number. To change the size of the font, it's a little bit different here. We're going to actually use the scale. I am going to change the alignment to center, both options there. And then I'm going to bring the scale down. I'm going to lock the proportions there. And I'm going to bring the scale down to 0.25. And I'll start to position that. I'm going to scrub that over. And take a look. There is our 0. Maybe bring that out just a little bit more. And from there, I can start to create my other numbers. I am going to label this so that I know which number it is. Continue the process. I'm just going to select the 0 and copy and paste it. And I'm going to change that to 10 and then go down into my text options. Select that, set that to 10. And then I'll begin to move it into place. So I'm going to drag it on up and bring it out a little bit. We'll take a look at it. And then just continue the process throughout the rest of the numbers. And with that, we have created all of the numbers for our dial. We do need to create a material for all of our dashes. I'm going to create this one a little bit differently. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see Content Drawer. I'm going to click on that and open it up. In this Content tab right here, I'm going to add a folder for materials. I'm going to right-click right in here, go up to New Folder, and I'm just going to label that My Materials. And double click so that we're in there. And again, I'm going to right click one more time and I'm going to go up to Material to create this material. And I'm going to call this Shiny White. And double click on that material. It's going to open up into this material editor. If you want to, you can grab right here at the name, drag that up and dock it next to main so that we can see it a little bit better. And this is the basics for creating a material. This is very simple, the one that I'm going to create. We're first going to need to change the base color. So I'm just going to click on this little circle right here next to base color, drag out, and I get this dialog box and I'm going to search for constant. And you'll see that we have several options for constant. What I need is a constant 3 vector so that I can have red, green, and blue. So attached to the base color, it knows that I'm wanting to create a color with it. I can double click on the swatch right here and open up the color picker. And I'm just going to create a white color, solid white color, and hit OK on that. Now I want to add some shininess to this. This is a little bit dull, so I want to make it a little bit shinier, a little more reflective. To do that, I'm going to come to roughness and I'm going to drag out and do the exact same thing. And I'm going to search for a constant. This time, all we need is just a single constant right there. It's going to allow us to add in a value, and the value defaults to 0. And that's exactly what we want. At 0, we have all of this reflection going on here. It makes it shiny looking. If we bring this up to 1, you'll see that it goes back to being very dull. So I'm going to set that back to 0 and we'll leave that as it is. I'm going to hit apply right here and then save. And now I'm going to jump back to the main level. So I need to add that material. I'm going to go to the small dashes first, and I'm going to open up our small dashes cloner and go to cylinder right there. And with the cylinder selected, you'll see that we have an option for materials right there. On this drop down, let me see if I can pull this out. There we go. On this drop down right there, I'm going to search for shiny. And there's my shiny white material. I'll apply that to our small dashes, and you can see that they definitely change color. We'll do the same for the large dashes. Open that up, go to cylinder, drop down to materials, open that up and search for shiny and select that shiny white material right there. And so now that has been applied to all of our dashes. I am going to save everything. Probably should have already done this, but I'm going to hit Control S for saving the level. And now I'm going to do a Control Shift S to save everything, because like our shiny white material right there also needed to be saved. To create the next piece, I'm going to use a 2D shape, the ellipse. I'm going to double click on that and going to go to the properties for that and drop down to the shape size here, and going to increase that shape size to fill that center circle there around 249. And we're going to add a modifier to this. So again, with that selected, we'll go to the operator stack tab here, add modifiers, and going to click on the modifiers. And the one that we want is the plane cut. You'll see there immediately what it is doing. It is cutting this in half. And so let's take a look at the properties for that plane cut, and we'll adjust them a little bit. What we need to do is to adjust the rotation, and I'm just going to dial that back, and it's going to be 0 that it needs to be set to. So you can see how that plane cut works. I am going to go back into the details, and I need to change the distance here for it to be out away from the background, but behind the numbers. And so I'm going to set that to a -0.5. We do need to change the color. So going to go into the material properties. I'm just going to use a simple click on the color picker, and I have a hexadecimal that I'm going to drop in there for this one. I'm going to just paste that in and set that, hit OK. And I do need to make this unlit. And with that one created, I can easily create the other one by duplicating it. So I'm going to go into Motion Design Outliner here, and we're going to duplicate that, Control C, Control V, and I'll move back into the operator stack and adjust the rotation, bring that back to, should be 180. And so we have a top and the bottom, but I'm going to change the color of the top one. And again, with that one selected, go into the material property there, open that up, and I have another hexadecimal that I'm going to copy and paste into that. The next thing we need to do is create our animated bars. Instead of using an ellipse, this time we're going to use the 2D shape ring. So I'm going to double click, drop one of those in there. You'll see the outline of the ring right there. I'm going to go ahead and bring this out to a -1 on location. And then I'm going to drop down to the shape properties for it. And I'm going to increase the size up to around 400, just so that I can get the outer edge into our outline right there. And then I'm going to adjust the depth of it right there, the width of it right there, by decreasing that number on the inner size right there. I want it to cover our smaller dashes, and I'm going to change the color. So I'm going to select the color picker, and I'm going to use that bottom blue color right there again, paste in the hexadecimal for that, hit OK, make sure that that is unlit, and back in our shape details, using the angle degree here is how we're going to animate the lower bar. So I'm going to adjust that just a little bit, and then I'm going to bring the start degree down so that we get it to start, and that should be right at 90 degrees. And you'll see using the angle degree here that we will be able to animate that bar. All right, to animate this, we're going to need to go into the sequencer down here at the bottom. I'm going to increase the space here so I can see it a little bit better. Now, there's a couple of ways that I can get that ring into the sequencer. Yes, I can grab that, drag it down, and drop it. But what I want is that specific angle degree property to be available when the ring comes in. So I'm going to go here with the ring selected. I'm going to go to my details panel, go to that angle degree that we're going to animate, and I'm going to click on this, add a keyframe for this property, and it drops the ring in and it adds that property that I want. And so now I can animate this. I need to do a little bit of setup to my sequencer. I'm going to change the frame rate to 24 frames per second, and then I'll add some time to it because right now it's only about 2 seconds long. I'm going to set this at 10 seconds long, so I'm going to jump out to 240 frames, and then I'll need to expand this out a little bit, and I'm going to set the playback end. And so I'm going to set that at 240 frames. So now my entire sequence is 10 seconds long. I need to do a little bit more work to this animation. So I'll bring the timeline indicator to around 168. That should be about 7 seconds. And let's go ahead and increase that angle up a good bit, just somewhere in there. That sets the second keyframe. I am going to jump back to that first keyframe or the very beginning of the timeline and set that to 0. And so now we have this first animation so that we can at least watch it increase from 0 up to right there. All right, and if we want this to bounce a little bit, the best way I've found to do that at this point is just to start moving and changing keyframes back and forth. Let's jump back to the beginning and take a look at that animation. So all of the keyframes can be adjusted as far as their location in the timeline for timing and also the amount of the angle so that you can dial in a little bit better animation. I'm going to take a look now at our second bar up here because we have to do this one a little bit differently. I'm going to go to 2D shapes. I'm going to double click on the ring, make some adjustments to our ring. I'm going to set this to -1. I'm going to go ahead and change the color right here. I'm going to select that and I'm going to use the eyedropper and just jump in there, select that color right there and make sure I am back on that ring too right there. Use unlit material, and then I'm going to drop down to my shape properties and increase that to 403 and then bring this down to 0.75. Now, a problem with this is that I cannot, for some reason, this will not work the opposite way. I've tried many different things to get this to work so that the bar starts here and moves in this direction, but I've just not been able to do it with these properties. So I have to use a modifier and another copy of this ring 2 to accomplish it. The modifier we want is the Boolean modifier. So I'm going to select this ring 2. I'm going to go to the operator stack, go to my modifiers, add the Boolean modifier to it, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. I'm going to make a few adjustments right here. I'm going to change the angle of this to 180 and then change the start degree to 90. And so what you'll see is that I just have a half circle here. What we're actually going to do is rotate this. So it's going to be hidden down here using this Boolean modifier. You'll see that in just a minute. But after we hide it, then we're going to animate this ring 2 so that it just rotates back up into this direction. All right, to do that, to accomplish that, we are going to need a copy of this ring 2. So Control-C, Control-V. So I'm going to make sure that ring 2 is selected. That's the one we're going to animate. I'll go into the operator stack. That one needs to be the target. And then go select ring 3. We'll go back into the operator stack for it. Take a look at the mode. And we're going to make this subtract. And so what we are doing is saying subtract ring 3 from ring 2. So wherever ring 3 is, ring 2 will not be able to show up. You see that there. And then what we will do is we will animate ring 2 on the rotation. So I'm just going to select ring 2 just to show you this. And you'll see that as we rotate it, we're able to move it into place like the other ring. So that's how we're going to animate it. So I'm going to set that back to 0. And again, to set this property into the sequencer, I'm going to click the keyframe button right there. It sets that into ring 2 into the sequencer and the transform property for rotation. And we will use roll to animate that. So just very similar to what I did earlier. I'm going to set a keyframe right there on roll. We'll bring it out just a little bit, just vary it a little bit and animate that on up. And then we can begin to adjust it back and forth to have a little variation in there. And now I'll jump back to the beginning of the timeline and watch both of those play out. Last thing we need to do is just add in our text here. So I'll go back to the actors, go to text, double click on that. And we do have a text actor in there, just can't see it. So we'll select that and hit -2 on it. And there we have our text. And I'm just going to center that up a little bit, be a little bit easier to move into place, bring that up just slightly. And I'm going to stick with Roboto. I'm going to uppercase everything, and this top word will be engine. Going to need to bring the size down just a little bit. Drop that into place. After I have that in place, I will copy that and adjust it and slide it down into place and change the text on it. And there is our design. I hope this has been helpful. For more on Unreal Engine's motion media design tools, hit the like and subscribe button and keep an eye out for upcoming tutorials.